Hello, hello, LegacyPoint. I hope you guys have been enjoying this very cold week. It's about midweek, it's Thursday, and looking forward to gathering with everybody and the entire family on Sunday. And just wanted to give you guys a little detail on fasting. I know we've been talking about, even introducing last week, how God has called the pastors, feeling like He's calling the church, LegacyPoint, to set aside 2018 in some seasons of intensified prayer and even fasting, to be able to introduce something that is meant to be a normal part of our Christian walk, not a legalistic thing. It's really a gift. It's a discipline to grow in, to connect with and have deeper relationship with the Lord, and do it as a people. And so this coming Friday the 26th through Sunday the 28th, we're going to call a corporate fast. And we've talked about some of the ways that happens. It's really just it's a time of setting aside specific time for the sacrifice of one thing and to replace it with prayer. And so that could be anything like food, it could be water, it could be even Facebook or television for the sake of seeking God. So for example, some of us, those 3 days will go water only. We'll only fast, we'll only drink water during the fast, where we'll go Friday morning until Sunday evening. Some of us, this will be new, and I don't recommend that. If this is your first time fasting, I want to recommend that you would take a lunch, and instead of having your normal lunch break or even lunch time with family, have it set aside for prayer. And so what that would look like is, let's say 11 o'clock hits on your lunch break on Friday, taking that hour to go and be aside, be away from people, and getting into God's Word and spending that time in prayer. So it's really substituting one thing for another. A good thing with kiddos, if you have families, that you could do is to actually set aside that time in the evening, maybe when you watch television or do those kinds of things, to specifically have devotionals as a family. So yeah, again, fasting is really, it's not a legalistic thing. It's not a thing that we do to try to make God move on our behalf, but rather it's what we do to set aside intentional and intensified times of being with God and being in prayer. And so for the rest of our time, I want to show you this quick teaching out of Isaiah 58, just to show you the heart that God gives us behind fasting. Here in Isaiah 58, in the first verse, he's speaking to Isaiah and he's saying, "Cry aloud, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob for their sins." And so the context of this passage, which is often recited in thinking about fasting, is that God is speaking to Isaiah and trying to help the people understand through Isaiah's message that some of the things they've been doing are hypocritical. They're saying one thing and doing another. That they wanted to move God's hand in some particular way, but weren't doing it in a way that is really healthy in the Lord. As a matter of fact, they were trying to manipulate Him through the tasks they were doing, and that task happened to be fasting. And so you can see what he says here going on in verse 2. He says, "Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgment of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments, they delight to draw near to God. But yet," verse 3, "why have we fasted and we see you not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? Behold, in the day of your fast you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with the wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice be heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose? A day for a person to humble himself is to bow down his head like a reed and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him. Why you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord?" And so the issue here was not that they were fasting, but the issue was how they were fasting and the condition of their hearts. They were fasting because fasting is, again, seen as a time of sacrificing one thing for the purpose of seeking God. And yet their sacrifice wasn't for the sake of God being glorified. It was for the sake of Him doing what they wanted Him to do. And in truth, it wasn't about even holy pursuits. They weren't wanting God to break into the city and change things or help people or really move on their city's behalf, but rather they were trying to get God to move on their own behalf for things like comfort and for their own pleasures. We see that right up here in verse 3, that, "Behold, in this day you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers." So we see that for God, a fast that is approved in Him is not one that we just do something that's outside of ourselves, like a ritual, and we don't eat food, or we don't watch television, or don't do these things at a certain time just for the sake of doing it that way, for the sake of honoring God through ritual. Not at all. As a matter of fact, what we see in this very verse is that God is more concerned with us taking a fast, taking time away from certain things that we need, to recognize that He is our ultimate need for the sake of actually living out His word. So even in this verse we see, behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. What He's really after, we're going to find out in the later part of this chapter. Here it is. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. A yoke being like a tool that somebody would put on someone's shoulders to make them do work. And in this context, to almost make them do work in a slave type mentality. Is it not to share the fast that I choose? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him, and to not hide yourself from your own flesh. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you, the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and He will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry, and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually, and satisfy your desire in scorched places, and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. And so what we see in this verse and in these section of verses in Isaiah 58 is that God is intricately desiring to meet with us in a way that our fasting would be for the purpose of His glory going forth, not just to our own lives, but to the lives of those around us. That God's chosen fast is a fast where we take time apart to pray for our families, for our streets and neighborhoods, for the welfare of our city. And that we would do so, we would take that time apart, again, sacrificing one thing and putting in its place prayer and time with God, both individually and as our families, that He would call us to do that for the sake of people flourishing. I love what He says here, that you will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. And so what we see God doing at the end of this month, and every fourth Friday to Sunday, we're going to be calling a corporate fast, where Legacy Point, we set aside time, again, whether it's a lunch break, full 3 days of intentional time during our meals, or some form of sacrificing one thing to put prayer in its place. We're asking God to move in our congregation, to move in our family, to touch lives, to deal with addictions, to heal families, to bring hope to our streets, that we might be ones that are like this Isaiah 58 passage, crying out for God's move in our city, crying out for God to repair the breaches in our midst, and to see our streets restored. So I want to encourage you to check out the fasting teaching below. There's a little PDF booklet that good friends of ours, Michael and Deborah Miner, put together some years ago, and that's going to give you more in-depth teaching on what fasting is all about. If you have any questions, please email or call us, and we're just looking forward to seeing what God's going to do in our city as we set aside time for His glory as we seek Him in prayer. Love you guys. See you this Sunday.